The Empty Cemeteries. Prologue. The first call. The first tip came in at 2:17 in the morning. It wasn't a text. It wasn't an email. It was a voicemail. The kind of voicemail that makes you sit perfectly still after listening to it because something about the voice tells you that the person on the other end has already decided that nobody is going to believe them. The woman sounded older. Not old. Maybe early 60s. Professional. Calm. She introduced herself as Eleanor Voss, cemetery director for one of the largest municipal cemeteries in the country. She didn't say which city. She didn't say which cemetery. Her first words were, "I'm not calling because someone stole a body." There was a pause. A long one. Then, "I'm calling because there aren't any bodies to steal." Chapter 1. The Woman Who Kept the Dead. Eleanor Voss had worked at Fairmont Memorial for 31 years. She knew every section, every mausoleum, every old family plot, every forgotten corner where the grass grew differently because the ground beneath it had settled decades ago. Fairmont was enormous, almost 300 acres, more than 190,000 graves. The cemetery sat inside the western edge of the city, surrounded by neighborhoods that had grown around it. From the air, it looked like a second city. Roads. Rows. Blocks. Houses. Except every house had the same address. Here lies. Eleanor loved the place. She was one of those cemetery directors who remembered birthdays. She kept a notebook of families who came every Memorial Day. She knew which widows still visited their husbands. She knew which children had stopped coming to their parents' graves. She knew which graves had been abandoned. And she knew exactly where everyone was supposed to be. That was why what happened next terrified her. It began with a police investigation. A detective had come to Fairmont on a rainy Tuesday morning. A man had been murdered. The suspect had claimed the victim was buried somewhere on cemetery property. Police obtained a warrant. They selected a grave. Eleanor accompanied them. She watched the backhoe peel away the earth. The coffin appeared exactly where it should have been. No damage. No disturbance. The brass plate was intact. The identification matched. The detective opened the casket. Then he stopped talking. Eleanor remembered the silence more than anything. The detective stared downward. Then he looked at her. "Mrs. Voss." She stepped closer. The coffin was empty. Not decomposed. Not disturbed. Empty. The suit was still there. The shoes were still there. The wedding ring was still on the hand. Except there was no hand. No bones. No body. Nothing. The clothing lay flat against the bottom of the coffin, as if someone had removed the person without disturbing anything else. The detective whispered, "How long ago was this burial?" 22 years. He stared into the coffin, then back at her. "You're sure?" Eleanor almost laughed. She had worked there for 3 decades. She had personally signed the burial record. "I was here." Chapter 2. Then they opened another one. The police assumed it was an isolated incident. Until they opened another grave. Then another. Then another. By Friday afternoon, the investigation had become something else. The state cemetery inspector arrived. Then the state police. Then federal investigators. Eventually, Eleanor was sitting inside her office watching 3 FBI agents examine a map of Fairmont Memorial. One agent asked her, "How many graves are here?" 193,000. Give or take. Give or take. She looked offended. "I know my cemetery." The agent nodded. "That's why we're asking you." They began with one section, then another. They selected graves randomly. Old graves. New graves. Burials from the 1940s, the 1970s, the 1990s. People buried 6 months earlier. People buried 70 years earlier. Every casket was where it belonged. Every burial vault was intact. Every grave marker was correct. But the bodies were gone. The caskets remained. The clothing remained. Jewelry remained. Photographs remained. Sometimes medical implants remained. One man had been buried with a titanium hip. The hip was still there. The bones weren't. The investigators began documenting everything. Eventually, someone said the sentence Eleanor had been dreading. "We need to check all of them." Eleanor stared at him. All. Took 9 months. They worked section by section, grave by grave, casket by casket. When the final report was completed, the numbers were impossible. Every single burial was empty. Nearly 200,000 graves. Nearly 200,000 coffins. No bodies. Chapter 3. Across the country. 3 days after the final report was sealed, another woman called the tip line. Her name was Margaret Hale. She was the director of another major city cemetery. She and Eleanor Voss had never met. They lived nearly 1,000 miles apart. Different states. Different cemetery systems. Different investigators. Different police departments. Different histories. Margaret was also a nice woman. That was the strangest part. Neither woman was hysterical. Neither sounded insane. Neither was looking for attention. Margaret said, "I heard about the investigation in Fairmont. You shouldn't have." "I know." "Then how did you?" Pause. "Because the same thing happened here." Chapter 4. Hawthorne Memorial. Hawthorne Memorial was older than Fairmont. Founded in 1884, it contained some of the city's most important families. Politicians. Industrialists. Doctors. Bankers. Soldiers. Children. Thousands of ordinary people. More than 160,000 burials. Margaret had been director for 24 years. The police had come because someone reported seeing a man digging at night. They found him near an old grave. He ran. The police opened the grave. Empty. They assumed the body had been stolen. Then they checked the next grave. Empty. Then another. Then 5 more. Margaret called Eleanor after the FBI had been brought in. She asked one question. "Did you find anything strange about the coffins?" Eleanor answered, "Yes." "What?" "They're all closed." Margaret was silent. "So are ours." Chapter 5. The first strange thing. The strange things began after the investigations. In Eleanor City, people started reporting a smell. Not decomposition. Something sweeter. Almost floral. It appeared at night. People described it as smelling like freshly turned earth mixed with roses. Then the cemetery cameras began malfunctioning. Only between 3:11 and 3:17 a.m. Every night. The recordings wouldn't show static. They would simply skip. 6 minutes missing. One morning, a groundskeeper found footprints in section 44. Bare feet. Adult-sized. The prints began beside a grave. They continued across the grass. Then stopped at the cemetery fence. There was no corresponding trail outside. The next morning there were 12 sets. Then 30. Then hundreds. All heading toward the same section. Section 44. The section where Eleanor's own parents were buried. She stopped going there. Chapter 6. Margaret City. Things were happening in Margaret City too. People began disappearing. Not dozens. Not hundreds. 1 or 2 at a time. A homeless man. A night security guard. A woman walking her dog. A teenage boy who had left home after an argument. Police couldn't find them. Then residents started reporting something else. People were seeing strangers standing in their yards. At first they assumed they were burglars. But the strangers never moved. They stood perfectly still, facing the houses, usually at night, always barefoot. One woman called police after seeing 3 men standing beneath a streetlight. The police arrived. The men were gone. But the street was covered with wet footprints. The footprints led toward Hawthorne Memorial. Police followed them. They found the cemetery gate standing open. The cemetery had been locked. Nobody had the key. Inside, hundreds of graves had fresh footprints around them. Not one grave had been disturbed. Chapter 7. The photograph. Eleanor received an envelope without a return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed Fairmont Memorial, taken from somewhere high above the cemetery. She couldn't understand how it had been taken. Then she noticed something. Every grave was visible. Every row. Every path. And every empty grave had a person standing beside it. Thousands of them. The image was blurry, but Eleanor recognized one. Her mother. Standing beside her own grave. Eleanor dropped the photograph. She didn't sleep that night. At 3:14 a.m., someone knocked on her front door. 3 knocks. She didn't answer. Then a woman's voice came through the door. "Mom!" Eleanor froze. It was her mother's voice, exactly as she remembered it. "Mom, it's cold." Another knock. "Can you let me in?" Eleanor backed away from the door. Her mother had been dead for 27 years. Then the voice whispered, "Why did you leave me in the ground?" Chapter 8. The 2 women. Margaret and Eleanor finally spoke by phone. Neither woman knew who had leaked the other woman's number. Neither cared. They compared notes. The missing bodies. The empty caskets. The footprints. The 6-minute camera gaps. The strange smell. The people appearing around homes. Then Margaret said, "Eleanor." "Yes." "Did you ever notice something about the graves?" "What?" "The bodies weren't removed." Eleanor frowned. "What do you mean?" Margaret's voice dropped. "If somebody stole them, there would be evidence." "I know." "No." She breathed slowly. "I mean, there's no evidence because I don't think the bodies were ever taken." Eleanor didn't answer. Margaret continued. "I think something came and got them." Chapter 9. The map. Margaret had begun mapping the empty graves. Eleanor did the same. They discovered something neither federal investigation had noticed. The empty cemeteries weren't random. The missing graves formed patterns. From above, the graves connected. Lines. Curves. Circles. At Hawthorne, the pattern resembled an enormous spiral. At Fairmont, it was different. A straight line running through the cemetery. The 2 women placed their maps side by side. Margaret whispered, "That's impossible." Eleanor looked at the maps. "No." She pointed. "It's the same shape." It was. The pattern from Fairmont continued perfectly into the pattern from Hawthorne. 2 cemeteries. 2 cities. Nearly 1,000 miles apart. But together, their empty graves formed part of something enormous. Something that couldn't possibly fit inside either cemetery. Something that appeared to continue beneath the ground. Chapter 10. The first return. The first body came back on a Sunday. A cemetery worker found the coffin open. The man buried inside had been dead for 46 years. His name was Thomas Bell. The coffin had been empty when investigators examined it. Now Thomas Bell was inside. Except he looked exactly as he had when he was buried. His hair. His skin. His clothes. Everything. Not a trace of decomposition. The medical examiner couldn't explain it. Then they noticed something. Thomas Bell's eyes were open. Someone asked, "Did he die with his eyes open?" His daughter shook her head. "No." The medical examiner leaned closer. There was dirt beneath the man's fingernails. Fresh dirt. Then the corpse moved. Only slightly. The finger twitched. The daughter screamed. The medical examiner stepped back. Thomas Bell opened his mouth and whispered, "Don't let them put me back." Chapter 11. The phone call. Eleanor's phone rang at 3:14 a.m. She answered. No one spoke. Then she heard breathing. Not through a phone. It sounded like someone standing directly beside her. She turned. Nobody was there. Then a voice said, "We're almost finished." Eleanor whispered, "Who is this?" The voice answered, "You keep looking for the dead." A pause. "You should be looking underneath them." The line went dead. Outside her window, every streetlight on the block went out simultaneously. Then something moved across her lawn. Eleanor watched from behind the curtain. A figure. Tall. Extremely thin. Barefoot. It stopped beneath her bedroom window. It looked up and smiled. Chapter 12. What the FBI found. The FBI eventually discovered an anomaly. Not in the graves. Under them. Deep beneath both cemeteries were tunnels. Old tunnels. Older than the cemeteries themselves. They had been sealed decades ago. Some sections were brick. Some were concrete. Some appeared to have been carved directly through bedrock. But the strange thing was that the tunnels weren't connected to anything. No subway. No sewer. No mining operation. They simply went down. And down. And down. The deepest scans showed something beneath the cemetery. Something enormous. A chamber. Almost perfectly circular. Nobody knew who had built it. Nobody knew why. And nobody could explain the markings found on its walls. They weren't names. They weren't dates. They weren't religious symbols. They were lists. Thousands upon thousands of names. Every name belonged to someone buried in one of the cemeteries. Except the names weren't written in the past tense. They were arranged beneath a single sentence. The FBI photographed it. Eleanor saw the image. She couldn't read the language. Margaret could. She had studied the photograph herself and translated it. She called Eleanor. Eleanor. What does it say? Margaret didn't answer immediately. Then, it says. She swallowed. They are not dead. Epilogue. The next cemetery. 6 months later, Eleanor Voss disappeared. So did Margaret Hale. Neither body was ever found. Neither woman left a note. Neither woman's home showed signs of forced entry. But something strange happened afterward. A cemetery director in another city received an envelope. Inside was a photograph. 2 women stood together in a field. Eleanor Voss. Margaret Hale. Behind them was an enormous cemetery. Thousands of people stood among the graves. The women were smiling. And beneath the photograph was a handwritten message. We finally understand. Then, underneath that, there are 47 cemeteries. And beneath that, we have only found 2. The cemetery director stared at the photograph for several minutes. Then her office phone rang. 3:14 a.m. She answered. A woman's voice whispered, "Don't open the graves." The director recognized the voice. It was Eleanor. Then Eleanor said, "Whatever you do." A long pause. "Don't count the empty ones." The line went dead. Outside, beneath the cemetery's ancient oak trees, something began walking between the graves. Hundreds of barefoot footprints appeared in the wet grass. And one by one, the cemetery gates opened themselves.